So this is our part 2 of the lesson planning content clinic. Thanks for being here. We have 2 members and hopefully a lot of people online, like dozens of people online. In the first session, we covered all the big elements of the lesson plan. And in this session, we're perfecting our lesson plan with all of the smaller elements. And then we're going to go back and we're going to get this presentation perfect, so you can bring it into a classroom and use it like that. That's our goal today.
That is the goal. Yeah. And this is Woody Mason,
yeah.
And I'm Sonia Burgess. And so welcome to Lesson Planning Part 2. If you remember from Lesson Planning Part 1, our scenario is that you've hit your dream job. You have a contract for the exact place and grade level that you wanted to teach, and you are super excited, except your new principal has requested a lesson plan. And so you have to come up with something that's all filled in and ready to go for him or her. And so that's what our goal is for today, is to take all of those big chunks that we worked on the other day and fill in all of the other pieces that make a lesson plan go smoothly. This, just so you know, if you look down in the lower right-hand corner, it's labeled as anticipatory set, and that's one of the areas that are on your lesson plan form. So we'll get to it, but just kind of keep in the back of your mind that for this content clinic, that is our anticipatory set. We're setting the stage. We're giving you some insight in an engaging, fun sort of a way.
Something to think about.
Exactly. So if you are not familiar with the Arizona Department of Education, we're going to be starting there. Remember, this is a standards-based lesson, which means that our first stop has to be the standard. We have to go find what it is that we're going to be teaching, and we touched on that the other day.
Yeah. In our standard, whether we're doing a kindergarten or elementary school standard, or if we're doing a high school standard, we're summarizing an informational text. So there's a standard, there's a Common Core standard for every grade level for that, so it's made it nice and easy. So everyone's summarizing informational text. So the goal of any lesson plan, the goal of our lesson plan, not any lesson plan, a good lesson plan should be to have an aligned lesson plan. So that means the standard, the objective, and the activities and assessments all aligned. And once you finish, when you have that aligned lesson plan, that means the students are going to connect it in their mind right from the get-go. They know the purpose of the lesson, and students and the teacher. And then finally, when you finish that assessment, they know what's going on, it's aligned, they've been taught it, and they can do it. So we're doing an aligned lesson plan, and that'll come up a lot.
Okay, so let's dig into the first part of our lesson plan template. If you have not pulled it up, we're using the GCU College of Ed lesson plan template. You can get there through the Student Success Center. And we have covered a couple of places, and I'll point those out as we go. And we're going to start at the planning stage. So section 1 of this document, I'm kind of already assuming that you looked up at the very, very top and you've already put in your name, the grade level that you're imagining you're teaching at. Date is helpful when you're actually teaching so that you remember, when did I create this? Where does this fit in the big picture of things? What unit or subject does this relate to? And do you have a title for your unit plan? So I used to teach technology at the middle school level, and so I would label in there that this was hardware basics, or these were the electronic systems in a computer. So I would come up with a title for my entire unit so that I knew, oh, when I run across this as a random piece of paper on my desk, where does this fit into my teaching? And then I can go put it back where it really belongs, in my folders. So for part 1, it's the planning stage. And so what I've done here on the screen is to give you sort of a quick summary of what it is that we're looking for in that particular section.
Did I go back?
Yeah, you accidentally hit the word. We should be at the lesson summary and focus. So in a few sentences, summarize what this lesson is about. What is it that you plan on teaching? The easiest way to walk through this lesson plan as we're trying to pull one together and we're trying to create one is imagine in your mind, what is it that I will be teaching? So for instance, Woody and I actually talked about teaching first grade. And we were saying that, oh, we could teach about the life cycle of a butterfly and how it goes from a caterpillar, goes into the larva stage and turns into a butterfly. That's a pretty typical younger elementary grade level content. So I could imagine that that's what I'm teaching. If I were teaching, again, my world is middle school and secondary, so if I were teaching a unit in my technology class, one of my units or one of my lessons might be on introducing all of the components inside a computer. So I would, in my lesson summary, I would just sort of write myself a little sentence about what is it that this is all about. And so as I talk, you are welcome to continue to kind of fill in those places, and I'll pause as we go through this as well. Woody, do you want to tackle the classroom and student factors? What is that all about?
Yeah, well, if you're looking at the PowerPoint, you can read it, but anything that would impact the instruction, that's a classroom and student factor kind of thing. So if you're in an elementary classroom, let's just use the first grade classroom because that's what we're talking about. If you're in a first grade classroom and you have, let's say, a couple of students with IEPs, we have to consider that, and IEPs can range in so many different ways, so you have to consider what the IEP is, and what the IEP factor is. You could have a classroom that's really active, so that's a factor. Let's say your first grade classroom can't sit for more than 3 minutes at a time. That's a factor, and as a teacher, you know that going in. For this lesson, we don't really know what it's going to be like, but we can kind of guess what a typical first grade classroom is. So you're not going to get more than 10 minutes of sitting time. That's not going to happen. You're going to want to have hands-on activities. So the classroom factors are anything that can affect how you instruct.
A friend of mine was teaching a first grade classroom one year, and she had 30 students, and 25 of them were boys. That's a factor. And she even said that throughout her whole year, was that everything she did that year was geared toward engaging the boys, because she had so many of them.
Yeah. Or maybe you have a classroom that's 26 students large, and your room holds 26 students, and that is it.
That's it.
You're not going to be able to do as much walking around and movement in this classroom, whereas maybe if you're at a 15 student classroom, then you could. So it's another factor. So there's tons of factors that can impact the lesson. For this purpose, you might think of a general classroom and what kind of factors come up in a general classroom, but if you're doing this for a real classroom that you're in, then you just have to think about the actual factors.
The beauty of this is once you kind of write out that classroom and student factors, as you're continuing to build lessons, this is literally a copy and paste thing. Once you know what those factors are, like in some of your future classes, you might be given some specific factors, that there are 3 ESL students, that there are 3 students with IEPs, or that there are, whatever the factor is. This becomes one of those places that once you develop that or you figured that out, you can copy and paste it and move it into your future lesson plans too. Teaching notes is a really easy one. And if you're ever building a 10-day lesson plan, like a benchmark type project where you have to have multiple lessons, you'll want to just plug in there, where does this fall in that unit? Is this day 1? Is this day 5? Is this day 7? Where does this fit? So super easy, quick one to fill in. Questions so far? Yes.
What if it wasn't like with a unit, you were just like teaching one lesson and you still just write? What would you write in the teaching note?
I would put myself a note and just say standalone. And that way you know if you ever come back to this, like you're going through your class papers and things and you run across it and you're thinking, where did I do this at? If you wanted to, you could even put in parentheses content clinic, and that would really jog your memory as to where did I create this at?
And sometimes you might not have if there's a lot of content in the lesson plan, so if you're filling out the lesson plan and you can't think of any notes, you don't have any notes.
Okay, let's keep moving.
I do want to say, after the lesson, you might have some notes that you want to put in just to, if you're going to do it next time, you have reflection notes that could possibly happen as well. All right. How are we doing so far? We're moving along. We're going to keep plugging away. All right. The next thing is the agenda. The agenda is after you planned your lesson, all the steps in your lesson. The agenda is just a brief outline of the time requirements to make sure that you're staying on time. So for our lesson, we're doing the anticipatory set. That took 2 minutes. So I have on my agenda anticipatory set 2 minutes. We're going through lecture for such and such minutes. In a first grade classroom, you do your prior knowledge activation for 5 minutes. You do your maybe bell work part of that. So there's all the events that happen in your lesson. You just come up with the events and give it a time. That way you can fit everything in and complete the lesson. It'll happen to you, and it's happened to me a ton of times, where you start a lesson, you have a plan to get through it, but you only got through the first half of it, and you're like, what happened to my lesson? This agenda is supposed to help you stick to that time.
Okay, the next part of planning is the instructional materials, equipment, and technology. Now, right off the bat, you may not know what all you're going to need as you're going to be teaching this lesson. So this is one of those places where you may have to come back to it a couple of different times. So if you decide that you're going to show a video clip of how a butterfly goes through the life cycle phases, you're going to need to jot down, I need to make sure my projector's on, I need to make sure that I have the video clip queued up. You don't want it to start buffering halfway through and lose your classroom. So you want to jot yourself down some notes. What is it that I'm going to need in order to adequately, effectively teach this lesson? Now, if you look up in the presentation, there's another detail there. Attach copies of all of your printed and online materials. When you're finding something online, it's really important to write down where did you find it, especially if you're one of those people like me that goes to Google and starts searching for things, and 20 minutes later, I'm about 15 layers deep into a search. And if I've lost that, if I don't write down what the URL is, where I found it, it's really unlikely that I'm going to be able to replicate or come back to that same spot. As far as, attaching copies, that might be worksheets, that might be guided practice sheets, that might be graphic organizers, whatever it is that you plan on giving your students, that would also be attached here.
And then the instructions and just how you want those laid out, presented. Maybe you want to have materials for each team or group, or if you want to hand out your sheet work before the lesson or during the lesson. So those are just small instructions that you might want to use. The grouping is basically how you're going to group throughout the lesson. So you never want to have a lesson where you're just sitting in a chair. The students are listening to the teacher the whole time. You want to group them in different ways, get them up, get them moving. So there could be some one-on-one with the teacher and the student. There could be some buddy stuff going on, and it doesn't have to be, well, they're going to be in pairs for 20 minutes, and they're going to be alone for 1 minute or for 20 minutes, and then we're going to do a whole group activity for such and such time. It could be as simple as, well, during this formative assessment, they're going to have some buddy time. They're going to do a think, pair, share. So that's 2 minutes of buddy share. So you just want to kind of jot down the types of grouping that you're using: full group, one-on-one, individual, buddy, and then maybe where in the lesson that's happening. That way. And I think the best part of this section, or the idea in this section, is you don't want to have a lesson that's a singular grouping option. You want to have multiple grouping options to help your students
stay awake and stay engaged and stay connected.
What they need.
Right. Okay, the last pieces related to planning are here under the academic language section. Now, since we're imagining that we're teaching a unit on the life cycle of a butterfly, our key vocabulary would include some of those terms that you need to teach your students. Well, do your students know the words caterpillar and larva and butterfly and that big word metamorphosis? If they don't know that word, is that the right word? Maybe?
It's one of them, yeah.
So if they've never heard those words, and first graders most likely have not heard some of those words, those are the words that you're going to list out. The next two pieces tie really closely into that same idea, and they are the function and the form. Explain where does this fit into it. You can even refer back to your standards. Look for the verbs that you're working on reaching and teaching. You'll want to pull those in, and those are the explain, the describe. The student will be able to do what? Well, that what is your verb from your standards. So what is it that you're wanting them to do with that vocabulary? The form is just sort of that beginning of the structures. What is it that you're going to do to help your students remember those words? One of my favorites is a word wall. So somewhere in your classroom, you're going to have a blank wall. You might have, for instance, a bulletin board. And so you might put up there in the center, do sort of a mind map thing, where in the center you've got the life cycle of a caterpillar. And off of that, you've got those different key words. And as you teach them, as you learn more about them, you may have your students add pictures to it. They may add a little drawing. They might add a paragraph, or in first grade, not a paragraph, but a couple of sentences that they've come up with where do those words fit in to our vocabulary? How would I use this? Where does this fit? So that whole academic language thing kind of all works together. You have to start with the vocabulary and then move from there. How am I going to teach this? What is it that I want them to learn and do with this?
We want to have multiple ways that they actually learn this word. Multiple ways to review it. That way they can learn. All right, so now we're finally onto the instruction part of the lesson plan. And the first thing that you want to do is activate the prior knowledge, or make a prior knowledge connection. It's the lesson plan. And there's so many ways you can do that, but it's all the same function. You're basically just either asking the students what they know in that content, or you're giving them some mind joggers so they can access what they know, and then you're giving the students an opportunity to think about it, talk about it, or do something with it. And there's so many ways that you can do the prior knowledge connection. The KWL, for instance, is, I think, the most effective way, because if you have a kid in a first grade classroom, you do your KWL right on a visual so they can see all the things that they know. What do you know about butterflies? And the students would all, in a whole group setting, or they would think about it, talk about it with their buddies, and then you would just write them on the visual. That way they could see what they know. And that's a prior knowledge connection. It doesn't have to take a long time. It can take anywhere from 1 minute to 5 minutes, and you've activated prior knowledge and they're ready to learn the lesson.
If you remember back to part 1 of this lesson planning clinic, we did that. We had a couple, 5 or 6 words of vocabulary that we felt were really critical to making sure that you knew these words, you were familiar with them, that you needed those in order to keep going and to create this lesson plan. So things like alignment, summative assessment, formative assessment, standards, those were some of the words that we used as our prior knowledge connection. Okay? Like I mentioned at the very, very beginning, that anticipatory set is the engaging piece, trying to capture students' imagination and their attention. And so we did that through our dream job scenario. And we tried to kind of capture your attention and gain some excitement that you've done it. You've passed all your classes. The NES is a thing of the past. You've nailed it. You're good. And now we're ready to move on. And you've got a contract and you're so excited because you're in that district that you wanted to be in and you're at the grade level where you wanted. So that was our anticipatory set, something meaningful, something that connected to you guys, because this is the path that you're headed on.
If I'm teaching first grade butterflies, I'm going to put a song, the Reading Rainbow song, Butterfly in the Sky, something so high, to the book, that one, because we're going to be reading about butterflies, and it's
songs about
yeah. So I'm going to put that song on the speakers, and they're going to listen to it, and I'm going to say, hey, we're going to learn all about butterflies today. Who's excited? And then it's a maybe 30-second anticipatory set. Doesn't take a long time, but it gets the students excited and active, ready to do their thing.
Ready to learn.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so we're in the instruction part. How far did we get on the instruction part? I should ask you, how far did you get? Oh,
We didn't.
Oh.
We really didn't go through a whole lot of the I do, students do.
Okay,
We did not walk through there.
So we're going to be taking some time on it.
Yes.
Some time. All right, great. All right, so the instruction part is, well, this is the bulk of the lesson, and this is really what matters. This is how are you going to teach the summarizing of the informational text. So the I do section, that's what the teacher does. Yeah, so anything that the teacher does goes in the I do section. If not, the students are going to read a book and then they're going to talk. It's just what the teacher does. So if I'm a teacher and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for teaching butterflies, the teacher is going to maybe read a book about butterflies, a big book, because it's first grade or kindergarten. So a big book about butterflies. The teacher is going to discuss the key terms in the big book. Hey, remember this term? We talked about it in our prior knowledge activation. Let's talk about these terms. It's in the book. It's right here. So the teacher part is the I do part, the modeling, the actual giving of the instruction part of it. When you're thinking about what strategies to use in each step, did we cover the
We talked about Marzano's.
Marzano, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we even popped that up and looked at a couple of places in that document and that website.
Right.
So we kind of touched on it. We didn't dig too deeply into it.
Okay. So what I'm picturing right now is we need to actually take some time to think about what we're going to do in this lesson. Can we do that?
That's a great idea. Yeah.
So let's. I've been talking. We've been talking a lot. Let's think about our lesson. What can we do? And you're teaching kindergarten, right?
First grade.
First grade, okay. And you're going to do first grade too. You have a fourth grade standard on your lesson. We can change that, but it's still the same.
It's really similar
You're
wording
reading text,
as well.
You're using details to summarize the text. So we need to talk about what we're going to do. The I do section of teaching a summary to students.
About our butterflies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the other piece that's on the presentation is really for your professors. So here at GCU, we use this template in all of our College of Ed lesson planning classes. So if you're creating a standalone lesson, if you're creating a 10-day benchmark unit, these things really apply to you as a student. You don't have to go through that step whenever you are the teacher. It doesn't matter that you numbered, well, numbering them is a good idea, but you don't have to include bold for the modeling. You don't have to italicize every formative assessment. That really is something there for your professors so that as we're reading 15 to 20, 10-page, 10-day benchmarks, we can begin to pull out, oh, where's the modeling? Oh, that's in bold. Where's your formative assessment here that goes with that? And we look for those things. So having taught a curriculum and assessment class, I will tell you that they're really critical and your professors love it when you follow that step. But as a future teacher in your own classroom, you can skip those pieces. Those are really there to help your professors out. Okay? So let's do some brainstorming.
What are we going to do? We're going to teach summary to students. What are we going to do?
So talking about butterflies?
Sure. Is that okay to stick with? Yeah. Okay.
We should do some reading. A big book, maybe. I always say big books. Whenever I went to a kindergarten and first grade class, they had big books.
So our first step might be to read a big book, read the story.
Yeah.
So I'm going to number it. It doesn't look like a number. And I'm going to add that this is whole class. So my grouping, if you think back to that, my grouping now is that the whole class is going to be engaged with this. So what are we going to do next?
Would this be a section where you would put like questions that you're going to ask so they can make predictions, and do we need to have those connections during the story so that they can do that?
Yes.
Do it afterwards?
Yes. So one of the things, are you going to ask them some questions before you read the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then we should go ahead and we should make a change there. And we should say that our first step, as that I do for the teacher, is some questions. Now, personally, I like having everything in one place so that when I find my lesson plan, I pulled it out and I'm reviewing, I'm getting ready for the day. What are my questions? And this is a great place to jot down what are those questions so that you can think, oh, what questions am I going to ask before I read the book? And maybe I'm going to ask questions again after I read the book or while I'm reading the book. So you would think about what kind of questions should you ask. Let's come up with a question. What would you ask your students?
I would do something based off of the cover, because in Virginia KWL, they're already going to be telling you what they know about butterflies.
If we are doing a KWL, that's going to go in the I do section. The K is going right in the I do section where you are leading that discussion of what do you know.
So in the beginning, would you just do the K and W, and then you do the L after?
Yeah. And you wouldn't do the W at the beginning, you might do it in the middle, or maybe even at the end of the first lesson, so you can move on to, hey, let's learn more about butterflies. What do you still need to know, right? So the W can go just about anywhere in the lesson, because, well, with first graders, they're going to learn a lot from this book. And maybe in also, instead of questions, or in addition to questions, give them a purpose for reading, some prompts. Hey, when we read this butterfly book the first time through, butterfly is going to change. It's going to change from something to something. I want you to pay attention. What's it changing from? That kind of
And
thing.
maybe one of your vocabulary words is change. Okay. So we asked them some questions, maybe even done the beginnings of our KWL. We've read the book. What happens next? What are you going to do as the teacher? Lacey, what do you think you do with your students after you?
Probably an activity, possibly.
I love it.
I remember when we actually had butterflies in the game.
Okay.
They turned into butterflies to be watched.
Watch the process.
That's all I remember about it.
Okay.
You might introduce the tank.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, the sky's the limit because we're creating a lesson out of nothing. So we can teach anything in terms of butterfly content that we want. Within first grade level.
We'll just say that we're going to show them the butterfly tank. We're going to introduce the that piece of our classroom. So we're going to be watching the butterflies as they. Okay, I don't know.
Some students are calling us. We're busy.
There you go. Can't take this phone call right now. So we're going to introduce that butterfly tank, and we're going to explain a little bit about it. How would our grouping change? No, not really. Not this time. What activity could we do with our students where our grouping would change? Okay, so maybe we want to do something with sensors. And in the I do section of your lesson plan, you would be explaining what those centers are. So you have to point out to your students that this center is going to be drawing a picture of something you saw in the book. This center is going to be doing something else.
Finding the parts of a butterfly.
There we go. Maybe you've got some butterfly puzzles. Maybe you've got, something that they can kind of move around and they're finding different things. Maybe there's a little, I don't know,
Stages.
oh, I love
The
it.
different stages.
Okay, so you want to list out what your centers are and if there are any special instructions to go with those centers. So what is it that, think about again, what is it that you would do as the teacher?
Your role.
Yes. So what is it you're doing? What is it? And when you're really beginning this, it even helps to write down exactly what you would say. So when you think about it in your head, you're like, okay, I would say that for this center, I want my students to do this, blah, 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 blah. Write it down while you're still thinking about it. And then as you teach it, it's going to flow a little more naturally. You're not going to have to look back at your notes or cue cards to what it is you're going to say. But for me personally, it helped to literally write down word for word, what is it I'm going to say. And then it got easier, it got better. I didn't have to keep doing it.
And remember, this is a lesson that's focused on summarizing the text. So everything that you do should kind of reflect the text that you're using. We don't have a text. I made a fictional big book called Butterflies. And I'm imagining in this book, they're going to talk about the parts of a butterfly. They're going to talk about what's happening in the life stages of a butterfly. That's what I'm picturing.
Mm-hmm.
So
There is actually a book called The Hungry Caterpillar. And
there is a good one.
there it is.
And
And it has all those pieces. The kids are introduced to this caterpillar, and he's really hungry, and he's munching on leaves. And that would fit beautifully into our caterpillar/butterfly take. Okay.
We should change our text through the very
Really, we should add in butterfly and get a copy of that book for next
They're
time.
going to be summarizing the very hungry
Okay, from here, next category over is what do students do? While you are explaining this, obviously they're listening, they're answering, they're listening here. When they get down here to some activities and some centers, what is it you want them to do? Is there a worksheet that goes with the centers? You want them to fill that out? You want them to color, draw? What is it that your students are going to be doing?
And it kind of correlates.
Yes.
What are they doing during this part? Well, they're sitting in their whole group, they're responding to prompts and questions. Sometimes you might have them in a buddy kind of thing, a one-on-one where they get to do a think, pair, share. So in that case, on the students do section, they're doing a think, pair, share. They're discussing whatever the prompt is. With the activity for the butterfly thing, they're probably going to gather around the tank, or if you bring the tank to wherever you're sitting, they're going to look at the tank. And so whatever the students do kind of correlates with what you do. So once you figure out what the I do section is, the students do section is just
Gets a little easier.
a little easier, and you're just trying to meet the needs, the learning needs of the students in that section. All right, well, they're not just going to be sitting and listening this whole time. What can I have the students do that will accent the content here?
So some professors talk about I do, you do, so that's not.
Doesn't quite fit that. When I teach the 10-day lesson plan piece, I actually leave this slight tweak to this, and I put a little section down here below for differentiation, and I kind of change it to the I do, we do, students do. In the students do section though, since we didn't modify this, we took it directly off the GCU website. I would say under the students do section, just make a little, there you go, like either cut it in half or make a little note beside it that we do, and maybe put the we do in parentheses, that we are going to do this together. Together we're going to answer some questions. Together we're going to fill out parts of our KWL chart. Whatever the pieces are that you're going to model while they do it with you, that would be that we do. And great point, I should have pointed that out.
Why is it important to do we do before sending the students to centers?
Do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Well, when the teacher is modeling the I do section, they're basically doing it for the students. The students are looking at it and they're thinking, oh man, I want to do that, but they haven't done it yet. So the teacher, if they just send them off to the I do or the students do section, they're going to get lost and it'll be helter-skelter. And so it's just a management thing. The we do is the guided practice part of the lesson where, okay, I've done this, now I want to make sure you can do it, so let's do it together. And that way you don't send them off and have a management disaster, which will happen.
It's also part of their learning process. They're watching you do it, and now they're hands off. And in the we do section, they begin to be able to be a little more hands-on. And you're there to make sure that they stay on the right path, that they follow the steps that you've shown them, that they work through each of them in the order that they need to. So think about a math problem. They're walking through it with you, and so they know that if they have questions, you're right there to answer them. They know that if they begin to get off track, that you're, oh, she's right here. Okay, I can just ask her. And then once that we've gone through that togetherness piece, then we can kind of turn them loose and say, okay, now you've done a great job here. Let's go see if you can do it on your own. Kind of building that confidence a little bit as we go.
And did we talk about differentiation?
You know what? We did talk a little bit about differentiation the other day. That's kind of one of my passions.
Yeah.
So differentiation, like we talked about, are different ways that we can engage our students. And it's not about their standardized test scores. It's not about that, oh, they're in the high reading group or the medium one or the low medium, the low reading group. It's really about, okay, I've got a handful of kids who are really, really interested in pollution and protecting our neighborhood and taking, good care of our environment. And they are so passionate about it that even as first graders, they've come in and they've told me and I know this about them. So with my butterfly, I can go ahead and I could create a worksheet or a center or do something for that smaller group of students to help them to see the connection between taking care of our environment and how that helps the caterpillar to be able to eat clean, good food, as well as how it helps our butterflies to be able to grow into good, strong, healthy butterflies. That they're not having to set up tin cans and pollution, junk.
Yeah.
So in that, I've thought of, oh, my students and what are their interests? Who are my students? The other thing to look at would be those really energetic students. What could I do during that centers and activities that's going to give them an opportunity to safely, in a controlled environment, to kind of get rid of some of that energy? Maybe they have a little space in the back of the room, like our room has a little space back there, and a group of 4 students might be able to pretend for a minute or two that they're a butterfly. And so what would it feel like to be a butterfly? And they could kind of act that out. And they could spread their wings so much and get rid of some of that energy.
Yeah. And it could be a general differentiation too. Just we have visual, every class has visual learners. You're going to have a visual learning aspect.
Right.
Some are audio learners and they want to talk. So you've got to give them a chance to talk. And that's every class. So you want to fit that kind of differentiation in just about every lesson.
Right. And so now we are moving on to the last piece of our lesson plan, and that's assessment. Now, in our first session, we talked about summative because we jumped straight from our learning objective to our summative assessment. How is it that I'm going to evaluate, did my students learn? When you get back to this section, now you've done all of this planning for instruction, is your summative assessment still on track? Does it still fit the learning that you're seeing evolve through that lesson plan and that teaching? So at this stage of the game, because we did it first, this would just be our kind of our double check. Woody, what's the importance of closure?
It's the last chance to get a content in their head, stuck in their head. So you want to pick out something that's quick, but something that can basically cement the content into the student's head. I like to think about closure as the thing that when the parent comes home or when the students come home from school, they say, what did you learn about today? The closure should stick. And I always said that to my students. When you go home today, this closure, what we're talking about now, this is what you tell your parents. This is what you tell them. So closure can be, I've talked about it a lot, but like a big pair share about what did you learn about butterflies today? Go find a buddy and tell them what you learned about. Or it could be something that they write down real quick. What was our closure? We had a little Post-it note.
We did. We forgot that today.
We thought one student, it wasn't worth having one student, but our closure was, we were going to hand you a Post-it note and you were going to tell us one thing you learned. Oh, there it is.
There you go.
3, 2, 1. 3 things you learned, 2 things you liked, 1 thing you have a question about. With the KWL closure, we learned the L is the closure. So again, the KWL is the best lesson plan or the best teaching strategy you'll ever use, because there's no one will come into that and say, well, you didn't do this part of the instruction. Well, no, I did. It's right in the K or the L or the W or the L. They're all covered. They reflect on their learning. They learn. They activate prior knowledge. It's like an all-in-one perfect teaching concept.
Tool.
Method tool, yeah.
And that really gets us to the end. Well, homework, we haven't really talked about. Homework in this section is just, are you going to send anything home with them that you want them to do outside of your classroom? And sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes not so much.
Maybe the small butterfly book.
Maybe.
Or
Or maybe watch the video at home with your mom and dad, if we've already established that there's technology available. Okay, so
we have about 10 minutes. Wait, 8? 5. We have about 5 minutes. So we need to perfect our lesson, right? That's what we're doing. So, what do you want, like one-on-one and just sit with them, or?
sure.
And I don't know what we would do for the online video piece, because.
Well, they can work on their lessons.
Yes.
Yeah.
You work on your lessons at home. Those of you in the home audience, you work on your lessons, perfect it. Is there a way to, we know their emails. We know who you are. If you have any questions, we're sending the presentation to them, correct?
And they can also post questions on our professional learning network.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
That's what I was
That's really what I was searching for.
Some sort of something. But, so right now, we're going to work one-on-one here. I think we're wrapped up in terms of the video thing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for being here, guys.